Hi all, I have an absolutely amazing game to show you today. This is by Ragozin. So Andrei Liliental was playing against Ragozin in the Moscow 1935 tournament. This is a really major tournament with the likes of Capablanca playing in it. So Ragozin was a Soviet chess grandmaster, an international arbiter of chess, and also the second world correspondence chess champion. So in the ICCF, he was also a chess writer and editor. So in every aspect of chess, he seemed to really excel. Born in St. Petersburg, his career came to the fore, according to the wiki, with a series of excellent results in the 1930s. So in the earliest of these, he defeated the respected master Ilya Zanevsky in a 1930 match and was awarded the title of Soviet master. At Moscow 1935, he won the best game prize, well, one of the best game prizes, for his game against Liliental. And this is the game I'd like to go over today. So let's have a look at this game. D4 from Andrei Liliental. We have knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and now bishop b4. So the Nims are Indian in this particular game. a3, black takes, doubling the pawns. c5, so restraining white's pawns there. f3, d5, e3, black castles. c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop d3. We have now knight c6. So black is not concerned if white wants to self-dice the pawns here. That really seems to backfire positionally, fundamentally. Knight e2 was played. So just for those materially inclined though, if you wanted to take, just knight d7 seems good. And check here, this seems like a very good continuation, where black's actually getting a small edge. White doesn't really want to suffer structural damage voluntarily. So knight e2, rook e8, white castles, a6. This is a very interesting plan, queenside expansion. And yeah, black's not afraid of d takes c5 during the evolution of this plan. We have queen e1. So just to put this on the board here, d takes, there's queen e7 simply. And then just taking here. It doesn't matter about white's blockade here. This should be equal. So queen e1, white has intentions to sort of play on the king side and maybe e4 later to open up the dark square bishop. And maybe even if the queen's parked on h4 very aggressively, then maybe knight g3 later as well could be useful. So black plays b5. This is actually quite interesting, opening up the second rank as well as the pawns. So this a7 square for the rook, for example, could be useful later. And that could keep a grip on that e4 break from white. We have queen f2, bishop e6, h3, and now we see rook a7, so quite nifty. Bishop d2. Here you might be wondering, is d takes c5 really that bad here? Yes, it is. Every time you structure, the structure is fragmented, there seems to be, adequate resources for black. For example, here it should be adequate resources for black, even though the bishop seems a bit active. This should be fine for black. This kind of position. White should only have a small edge if there's any edge. So bishop d2, queen b6, rook fb1, rook a e7, a4, and we have c4. So these pawns look as though they could be dangerous in the future. Bishop c8. We have knight g3 now. And here it looks as though white is really interested in playing e4, e5. This is a classic kind of central advance which would liberate the bishop, and driving away this knight would make the soft spot even worse if the f6 defensive knight is moved away. So a kind of prophylaxis against the move e4 is played here in the form of h5. And you might think, well, doesn't it weaken squares? Isn't the pawn weak? Yes, in some respects. Knight e2 is played here. So clearly, if e4 here, then h4. And this is going to be terrible for white, that kind of thing. The two rooks justify themselves there. So knight pardon me, e2, knight d8. A nice centralization of this knight to e6, potentially. Rook a2, bishop d7, a takes, a takes, rook b a1. It looks as though the invasion points could be serious at some point. We have bishop c8 covering the a6 invasive point. Rook b2, bishop d7, queen h4. Now knight e6, king h1, knight f8, and here knight g3 is played. And black has to be really careful here. He actually, Ragozin played a very, very interesting dynamic move here, trying to sort of celebrate his trump cards in the position, which primarily consist of these potentially dangerous pawns. So there's a fantastic move played here. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Black to play. Okay, rook takes e3, so an exchange sacrifice for one pawn, but also there's a pawn hanging here, potentially. So will it just be a raw exchange sack? But there's a pawn there. But wouldn't that lead a rook to be trapped? Aren't there certain tactical downsides of this operation? It seems to, fundamentally, it's got the idea of wipe out white's pawn chain and try and create connected passed pawns. This is often how the strongest neural networks in the world, like Lila, has been beating Stockfish on occasion with connected passed pawns. So is there connected passed pawn potential after this? Rook takes e3 to just try and undermine the pawn chain. An alternative here in the form of g6 seems to allow e4 basically, and this kind of position would be pretty bad. White stretching out the bishops and the space advantage. And yeah, this looks very, very squishy. White could just play like this, for example, as an example, and get a massive position constructed with d5 being weak, bishop being liberated. This pawn wedge is not going anywhere. It's just too dangerous for black, that kind of scenario, with lacking counterplay. So black has to do something active and plays rook takes e3. So very interesting move. Is it sound? Is a question though. Bishop takes, rook takes. So there's a pawn in the offering here, and black's trying to hammer this pawn chain at c3 now. So to undermine a pawn chain, classically you take the base of the pawn chain, or the exploitable base if the base is too theoretical in nature, you can't really reach to that. So the base of this pawn chain though would weaken d4. If both of the bases are taken out, d4 is actually going to be weak for the first time in the game. And getting rid of the dark square bishop as well kind of reduced the solidity of this pawn chain as well. There's a pawn in the offering here, and I found this pretty interesting. There's like two potential cardinal sins which are very different from... Let me massively contrast this with the blunders of online chess. In the blunders of online chess, players kind of seem to help. The faster the time that they're very, very helpful. And you might think in the 1935 Moscow tournament, how can players kind of be helpful in the style of 1935 one-day chess? And to me, maybe a little bit too much materialism is one of the ways that could be helpful, or a little bit too much passive play rather than going for their own threats. That could be another way. And we see these two kind of potential sins being committed here. White is a little bit greedy, I believe, here with knight takes h5. So this could be leading, to issues. Knight takes h5. Ignoring that pawn, and obviously the benefit of fantastic computer analysis, it seems in this position white might do better with a move like bishop f5. So, for example, this is pretty dangerous after queen f4 and doubling. And if white pursues his own dreams, for example, like this, and try and trap the rook, the rook could be trapped actually here without, leaving h5 gives this energy to trap the rook, and there wouldn't be too much compensation going on. This position, white's getting a big advantage. So that's one way. If bishop takes f5 and rook takes c3, then white can really go for it, leaving this potentially dangerous pawns, but going for the king, for example, like this, is really dangerous. So there are opportunities for white to not be passive, not be materialistic. I would say those are the two like kind of classical issues that might exist in the style of play generally at the time. But let's see. So another alternative, instead of taking here, if rook a8 is also kind of dangerous, just offering c3, so trying to be more dynamic rather than, offer a pawn and play like this. Now in this position with that f8 knight pinned, this could also be pretty dangerous. These kind of scenarios, white's getting a big advantage there. So there's all sorts of ways. Rook b a2 is also another way. Just try and make inroads, get a pin pieces, get dynamic play going, offer c3. For example, if c3 is taken here, it takes a little bit of time. So with that time, white can use the dynamics, it seems, and there's even things like this. Bang, rook takes f6, just going for black's king in this variation. So doubling rooks, not to go to a8 but to a6 to sack the exchange. Back here, this kind of dynamic thinking is actually really kind of dangerous. If white has to like stave off mate, that's it, it's going to be mated. So there's dynamic ways of playing this position, but white is a little bit greedy here with knight takes h5. So we have knight takes h5, queen takes h5. So a raw exchange down right now. 5 pawns each. The knight is thankfully defending h7 though. There is the potential, it seems, quite dangerous to pin that knight. And that would mean queen h7 is ignited if the knight's pinned. So this pinning move is actually prevented with bishop c6. And also, of course, protecting d5. So d5... a8, they're covered by the move bishop c6, and c3 is still a target here, that base of the pawn chain. We have queen g5, rook takes c3, and it looks as though isn't white trapping the rook. And so out of necessity here, there's not too many moves which help black. A blunder move here would be b4, and I hope you can see what would happen if b4 was played. That wasn't played. White could play if I give you 5 seconds. Okay, queen takes c3 looks pretty strong. So black is actually, and he calculated this, he has to sack another exchange. Now this is really super dynamic play from black. 2 exchanges, just to visualize this ambitiously, to get those connected past pawns. And now knight e6. And white is facing the temptation of doing another kind of cardinal sin, playing a little bit too passively to try and counter the opponent's threats. Although it's a good discipline to ask, what is the opponent threatening? I believe personally it's good to often try and make bigger threats. As I say, attack is the best form of defense. And here white played perhaps a little bit too passively. So this other kind of classical sin, it seems like a legitimate solid classical move. Why not just hold the pawn? But if white is prepared to play more dynamically, I mean it requires more effort at the board to play like this, but doubling the rooks, for example, this is really quite dangerous for black. As an example, b4, rook a6 and queen e2. So it looks as though, hold on, what's going on here? They're reaching this critical point, aren't they, these pawns? But check, offering the exchange, sack, and then queen e5. And even though the pawns, they're not too far away, it is a bit far. White's threatening checkmate here with queen h5. If knight f8, then rook takes f8. So this is just crushing, absolutely crushing. So it seems like this way of playing, let's look at this energetic response, not playing passively to defend d4, could have been, technically the best way to go. Instead of queen b5, queen b7, then check, and this one, rook 1 to a7, queen f4. This is also dangerous because it's hitting f7, and that's just a disaster for black. So it seems, yeah, this is the way to go. Let's have a look here. There doesn't seem to be too many possibilities. That so rook ca2 is a key move, not just defending d4. Okay, so white actually just played the kind of passive move rook d1, And here we start to see the wrath of the connected passed pawns, actually. b4, yes, rook b2, b3. So they're tying down white's pieces. Even though black is technically 2 exchanges down, the passed pawn potential, as we know from neural networks, they love connected passed pawns. That has become quite an often used way of beating, the calculator engine styles. So we have queen c3, knight c7, rook e2, queen a7. So even though 2 exchanges down, this is looking very, very good to try and unblockade with knight b5 coming up. And queen b4, knight b5. So not only hitting d4, but there's a facility here of queen a3. If black gets the queens off, then there's less chance of being mated. So queen a3 is also a powerful move here. And black is currently covering all the key squares, c5, d6, e7 with the queen. We have rook e7. Now queen a3 is employed. Queen e1 trying to get back some sort of attacking mechanism. c3, rook e8 check. It's a little too late this now, going for white's king here. These pawns are reaching critical mass. If rook a1, queen d6, this is an interesting line where maybe it could result in equality tactically like this. We reach this critical position where white could rely on perpetual checks for a draw. So there were some potential moves still. So this is another slip up, actually, rook e8 check rather than rook a1 technically. Bishop takes, queen takes, king h7. If there's no guarantee of a perpetual check, then black's connected passed pawns are going to be winning. Queen takes f7, and we have queen a8, so safeguarding that back row, safeguarding d5, and these 2 pawns are really ready to roll again. We have rook e1. If queen f5 check, king h8, queen g6, b2, and here knight d6 is a key move, stopping rook e8 check, and here the pawns crash through just now, okay, with b1 as the option used, not c1. So b1 crashing through, black will be winning there. So very, very dramatic scenery here on the chessboard, but these pawns are crashing through. So rook e1, knight d6, key move, queen c7, and now in this position, guess what black plays? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play here? Okay, celebrate the connected passed pawns. They're worth their weight in gold. c2, queen takes, b2, and there's actually the famous quotation about them becoming worth their weight in gold. Here, absolutely crushing pawns. And the key thing is there's no perpetual check potential right now. Queen f4. And, okay, a final little trick here. If b1, that could be a total disaster here. Black doesn't play b1 because check actually is good here for rook takes b1, robbing those pawns. And if g6, that's perpetual check time. So black played another really accurate move in this position to make sure these pawns are going to be queening without too much controversy. Guess what black played here in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, black to play the last winning move of the game is, okay, queen c6. So not only it's igniting c1, and it's also offering queen g6 as a potential resource if needed to any queen f5 check. The game ended here. So just to clarify, b1 as the example, ran into queen c6, pardon me, final move. If queen f5 check, to clarify this one, king g8 actually, king g8 here, and then the pawns are just queening. There's actually no need for queen g6. This is good. Queen's actually covering also e8 critically. So white just has to allow the pawns to queen. So it's actually really covering all the key squares, queen c6, and supporting c1. And yes, that's actually really the key consideration of the check king g8 there. That c1 is reinforced as well. Okay, so a really fantastic game from Ragozin. So a really accomplished player in many forms of the game, not just over the board chess, correspondence chess, arbiter, editor of a chess magazine, one of the most famous chess magazines in the USSR, former Soviet Union. So really, a really fantastic, colourful character who made great contributions to the game and was chosen by Botvinnik as one of his trainers and helpers for World Championship matches. And his legacy today is largely the Ragozin variation, which is a cross between the Queen's Gambit Declined and the Nimzo Indian. And you can check out a free interactive course there with lots of training variations at Kingscrusher TV/Ragozin. And there's also another free course for the Nimzo. If you do /Nimzo instead, you'll get the Nimzo. But Ragozin's legacy just lives on today. He did find very good ways to equalise with black with the Nimzo and the Ragozin systems. So a fantastic repertoire if you want to train on is there. Okay, hope you enjoyed this. Thanks very much.